Hi, I'm Claude,
And I'm Edzo, and you're listening to FamTalks.
where we talk about faith through apologetics and share it with you as our ministry. We hope to encourage families to talk about big questions on faith to counter the worldview from a word view.
Yes, that's right. And today we're going to be asking one such question, and that question is, what is marriage? If you
Hmm.
find this question interesting, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell so that you will be notified for whenever we upload next.
Wow. I love that question, my son, because it's something so personal to me as a married
Mm-hmm.
woman. I think in a world where marriage is no longer celebrated in a way that how I would say in the way God has designed it. Right now, people are more open to divorce. And I think this conversation would be important for us to talk about so that the young generation would still be excited to get married and possibly see how the Lord can use it to continue to prune them.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. It's a sad thing to see that there are people getting divorced. There are people who don't really live up to the oath that they take, that till death do they part, right? They part in their own ways on their own terms. And it's
Mm,
something that, as you said, it's not celebrated as much, although there are still celebrations. There's little being kept to keep that fulfillment that they made on those vows that they had. And I think, Mom, to just start us off, I think it's very important that we first get on the same level, that we first have our terms ready, right? So, Mom,
mm.
how would you define marriage?
Well, for me, marriage would be the union of two beautiful souls between a man and a woman, just how God has designed it, so that they can fulfill God's purpose for each one of them.
So, I think I should also tell to our viewers that since my parents celebrated their anniversary, their wedding anniversary last week, we're going to be having this kind of interview like episode where I'll be interviewing a married woman who also happens to be my mother. So
Are you happy
that's
with
why.
that?
Yes,
Who,
of
who
course.
happens to be my mother? Okay. Well, I think the
Okay.
beauty of that, my son, is that you've seen how your dad and I have also matured throughout the years of our marriage. So I
Mm-hmm.
think there might be certain things that you had some questions. So maybe this is your opportunity to grill me. Ask me question. Grill me talaga na na.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so that means I could ask any question that came from you yourself. So
Yeah.
I think there are also things that our viewers are hopefully curious about as well. And to
Hmm.
continue off, you said that marriage is between two souls, a man and a woman, to fulfill God's purpose.
Hmm.
So, what exactly is God's purpose for marriage? Why should two souls come together? And what purpose are they fulfilling by coming together?
That's a very good question, my son. And one thing that came into mind was when Paul talked about marriage and single blessedness, he
Mm-hmm.
said that it's really a calling to be single and it's also a calling to be married. Why? Because being married is not easy. Because once you get married, you let go of the me, myself, I mentality. So,
Mm-hmm.
one good example would be before getting married, all my plans for the day, just saying for the day, my son, would only revolve around me, right?
Mm-hmm.
What I need to do, chores I need to do at home, stuff like that. But when I got married, now I have to consider this person, what he thinks about my plans. For example, I plan going out to get a haircut. Is that something that he would agree with? Not exactly asking his permission, but sometimes because you two are now considered one in God's sight, He might also be making plans for you and the family.
Mm-hmm.
So, in a sense, like getting married means it's a calling because you move out from your self mentality to other self or other person mentality. You have to constantly see how the person would feel when you make certain plans. So that's why it's a calling, because our human tendency is to focus on ourselves
Mm-hmm.
since birth, right? So that's the
Yeah.
human nature. So when you get married, you have to shift from totally I to we. So
Mm-hmm.
that's one, right? So it's a calling because you focus from the shift to I to we. Next is that I believe that as you now become a we, the Lord, if the Lord will be giving you children to be a good steward of, that means it's also a calling now to partner together on how you're going to parent those children. So again, the I from a we, right? So
Mm-hmm.
this is not like, do you love mom more? Do you love dad more? No, it should be we. Like you come as a team together in the eyes of your children. It's not about who's better or who's earning more or who's that, right? Whatever the other person is achieving, the other person is also achieving. So it becomes
Mm-hmm.
a we. So it's a calling of I to we, and then now that we multiplies to more we's when you have kids. So you
Mm-hmm.
see how the Lord works there, that it continued to multiplies the people in your lives to remove the focus from yourself so you can really serve, right? So the second point in terms of that becomes the service. How are you now going to serve your family?
Mm-hmm.
So God's divine purpose for marriage is also cultivating that heart of service to each one of you. How are you going to serve one another? Because I think it's challenging in a sense of, again, it goes back to just thinking of the other person. It's so easy to say it, but it's really very, very hard to do it,
Mm-hmm.
So um God's divine purpose for marriage is to train you both, to prune you. Am I making sense here, my son?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
um, but bottom line is really to prune you into Christ likeness, because you become more focused on others rather than yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And then the next one is to be good stewards of the children that the Lord will entrust you with. And now you become again partners or as a team on how you're going to raise those kids.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely agree with that, Mom. I like how you worded it. It's a shift from I to we, from being fully focused on yourself. There are now your husband or your wife that you have to think about. There's your children that you would eventually have to think about as well. And I like what you said, that it's not a competition between the parents. Do you love mom more? Do you love dad more? Right? It's not a competition because you're
Mm,
companions, right? You work together, not against each other, right? You're
yeah.
working for each other and you're not working uh, to one up the other person, right? And I think that's what's important in any kind of marriage. Because when you're showing your children that you are working together, that you are a team, right? That's also how they're going to be treating other people as well. That's also how they would
Mm-hmm.
be treating their eventual wives and husbands as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully, they work together as a team and hope not against each other as well, right?
Yeah.
So, moving on to our next question, you mentioned that in marriage, it's really about serving each other. right?
Mm.
And I think that's one of the very important steps to a long lasting marriage, right?
Mm.
So for you, mom, how else would you be able, or what are other tips that you could give so that people would be able to enjoy a long lasting marriage?
Aside from serving one another, thinking
Mm-hmm.
about each other, I think in times of conflict, like giving each other the benefit of the doubt that he means well, that he's only looking after what's best for you is very important. I'm very, not very, but I find myself sometimes very, so I said it again. So maybe it's very guilty about it in a sense
Mm-hmm.
that uh when your dad's tone would shift into something, like I assume he means something. But in reality, it's not the case, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that part is something that I would also constantly remind myself that, hey, he means well. And
Mm-hmm.
it's really for him to be able to get my attention because sometimes I'm not listening or my thoughts are very, very far that I sometimes I'm lost with my thoughts. So when his tone would shift, it's because he wants to get my attention. But by the time that he gets my attention, it feels like he's mad or something, but that's not really the case. So I think giving each other the benefit of the doubt is very, very important. So in that particular situation, giving your dad the benefit of the doubt means on my end, thinking that he means well or that he meant otherwise, that I'm actually misinterpreting him in so many ways at that time.
Mm-hmm.
So lasting marriage should, again, it shifts again to the focus on the other person. I think we'll go back to that principle again to shift your focus from I to we, because the moment that it's so focused on the I, I'm only thinking of how I interpret it, how I'm seeing it, rather than how he sees it or how he's actually trying to just get my attention.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so for an enjoyable, long-lasting marriage, because marriages are ideally long-lasting till death do you part, right? That it's about giving the other person the benefit of the doubt, right?
Hmm.
Making them or thinking and always having the first thought be that they mean well, that they're doing this with good intentions, that they have the best in mind for you, right? And I think that
Mm.
also goes in that also goes both ways. That how you treat your spouse, how you treat your husband or wife, you also need to be doing the best for them. That
Mm.
your actions and your words should have the best in mind for the other person, right?
Right.
So again, as you said, mom, it's that shift from I to we. It's a shift from being a single person to being a team, being husband and wife, because you are now one together, right?
Mm.
So I think to cap it off, to end us all with one last question. I think that
Really?
question.
Last already? Have 10
You do you
hours
want
for
more?
this.
I'm sure there are a lot of things that we could ask, and there's a lot that we could discuss. But
I'm just
given
kidding.
how
I'm
little
just
time we
kidding.
have, mom, I think
Yeah.
it's fine that we end with one more question. And I think that
Mm.
question is, as we both know, right, communication is very, very important in any kind of relationship, especially one where you have to live together for the rest of your lives. So, mom, how do you, or to everybody who's listening, including me, how would you foster a good communication? All right. What are
Mm.
some practical steps to make sure that you have good communication with your partner?
Yeah. I think there are a lot of tools that can help, but on a practical note, just being able to connect with your spouse on a daily basis is very important. Because I think with the busyness of life, there are couples who doesn't have time to talk, who doesn't have that opportunity to connect every day. So what happens? They grow apart. You know,
Mm-hmm.
as husband and wife, you need to be growing together. And as you grow together, you can only grow together in your relationship if you're constantly connecting, communicating. And sometimes we don't really just communicate with words, even with nonverbal cues. For example, when your dad would drive me to work, I don't need to say much. I'll just hold his hand while he's driving. That communicates a lot already, how much I appreciate what he does, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
being able to connect on a daily basis is very important. I understand that there are couples who are far away from each other, meaning other the other um the it's probably the husband or the wife is abroad working or for some other reason we don't know. There's so much opportunities to connect through technology, so I think there's no excuse now. I mean, with the current world that we have opportunities to connect on a daily basis.
Mm-hmm.
And I think praying together also helps before bedtime, because as you communicate to each other, you also have to communicate to the head of your marriage, and that is the Lord.
Mm-hmm.
Because for one, we know for a fact that at some point you're going to disappoint each other and you just don't want to continue. And that's a
Mm-hmm.
sad reality. But if you're holding on to the Lord, He would constantly be the one to mend those things and try to connect you and try to keep you together.
Mm-hmm.
And I could say that without the Lord, I don't think your dad and I would be standing strong together until now. And and I think if people would be asking and they would be computing your age, they would be able to know that we didn't really started out well for me
Mm-hmm.
and your dad. We had you before marriage. I'm not very proud of it, but and you were our ring bearer. I think that's the best part. Uh
Mm-hmm.
and I would always treasure that moment when you were almost 2 years old at that time when we got married. It was a beautiful, most beautiful thing to have that photo taken with you. I'm in my wedding dress and your dad is in barong and you were in barong, a little handsome little boy ring bearer. We didn't start it out well, my son. So, but it amazes me. And I think during our early years of marriage, I don't think it was perfect as well. We were so young. And every time your dad and I would have a conflict, my immediate response is that I want to go home. I want to go back to my dad, to my mom, and leave him. But the amazing thing, I think, is that your lolo trusts him more. You know, so when when your dad and I would have a conflict, your grandfather, your lolo, would know that it's really my fault. So he would always tell me, go back home. Go back home. This is
Mm-hmm.
not this is not the best course of action. I'll bring you home. And I think with your dad, with the way he was wired, I don't know why. I think that's God's spiritual covering for our family, that he would always say that divorce was never an option for the two of us. And he shared that last week, right? So
Mm-hmm.
marriage, in a sense, once you've made that commitment to your spouse, it's a lifetime commitment. And that commitment means you communicate your needs, you communicate your thoughts, and it's not going to be easy. But that's the best way for your spouse to understand you. Sometimes we assume that they know, sometimes we
Mm,
think that they know, but truth is they don't know unless you tell them.
mhm.
So communication plays a very important key, and your commitment plays a very important key. But don't remember the creator who is the author of marriage, who brought you together despite of maybe a rocky start similar to your dad and me. We had a rough start, but right now I'm just so grateful with how the Lord had pruned us to be more
Mhm.
Christ-like because we have each other. And it's still not perfect, but I'm grateful every day for how He had brought us together. Amen.
Yes, and I am definitely just as grateful as you because I may be here without a dad or without a mom now. If you kept going home and my lolo and my grandfather didn't know you as well as he did, right?
He
So
knows I'm stubborn, my son.
very much so, it looks like. So to sum it all off, I think
Mm,
that you really nailed or you really put a great emphasis on how you need to constantly connect. And that
mm,
connection is not something that happens passively, it's something that happens
mm,
actively, that there are action steps that you need to do, right? Talking to them, holding their hands, telling them, talking to them, right? Praying with them. All these are action points, and all these are happening actively, right? Because
mm,
if you just leave it to time, leave it to grow with time, you're not going to grow together, you're not going to grow closer, you're going to drift apart, right? And once you start drifting, that becomes very dangerous, and because you might start considering divorce, and that's not a good thing, right?
right.
So I'm thankful to my dad. You're thankful to my dad as well that he
Mm,
never really considered divorce as an option. And I hope that our viewers as well doesn't doesn't think that as well. So with that, I think that's all the questions. I think we talked about very important points. Is there anything you'd like to tell our viewers before we sign off, Mom?
good question. Well, right now there had been ongoing conversation about divorce, and I think there are different sides to it. Some are pro-divorce, some are completely like anti-divorce, meaning you
Mm-hmm,
have to stay together. I think from a biblical standpoint, what the Lord has joined together, they stays together. They join
mm-hmm,
together till death do us part, right? But I do understand that some would opt to go that route of divorcing their spouse. And when I read through the comments and those who are pro divorce, who are for divorce, and I don't mean in any way to offend anyone, but I just noticed that some of the points or statements were more focused on if you're not happy, you have to file for that or go for it, you know.
mm-hmm,
So I think for me, if that's the only reason why we're divorcing our husband or our wife, I think we need to think again. Maybe let's go back to how we started. Go back to the first day that you have fallen in love with your spouse. And sometimes because with the busyness of life, we tend to grow in different direction. That's what I'm saying a while ago.
mm-hmm,
So because of that, that you've grown apart and that there are other things in your life, then you don't really know the person you are with. Like your spouse becomes a stranger. So why not pursue that stranger again and try to remember the day that you had fallen in love with him or her? And make the necessary effort to show him or to pursue him or to pursue her, in the bounds of marriage. And I think try your best first before really considering it. Because
Mm-hmm.
I think when we choose that option, divorce can be devastating. It's very hurtful. And it's not just only the husband and wife who are actually hurt in the situation, but also the kids and even the families. So
Mm-hmm.
even before considering it, I think you need to really pray about it and make sure that you have taken enough steps to get counseling, um, seek the counsel of your pastors or maybe disciplers before really moving that route. So I'm praying for all the marriages because without godly marriages, anak, my dear son, the next
Mm-hmm.
generation will not continue. And I think with godly marriages come godly families and godly generations. So I'm praying for all marriages, and I pray that the Lord will continue to protect this important unit of society, the marriage and the families.
And I think that's a great way to end us off. So, to everyone who's listening, thank you so much for listening. If you like this episode, don't forget to share it with a friend. Perhaps they could learn a thing or two about marriage.
So, with that, bye for now. If you have questions, see you at the comment section.
And thank you so much for listening.